Hello and welcome. We ended last time by stating that trial by jury answers almost all of the problems caused by government overreach, judicial corruption and incompetence. Let's analyse why this is true, and then proceed to tackling some of the reasons why there aren't hordes of people clamouring for this logical and moral remedy to be applied immediately. I'll begin by repeating a statement made to me many decades ago, which has stayed with me ever since, and then asking you a question. One of my school teachers once said, "The true test of any boy's character is what he would do if he knew he would never be found out." A morally motivated person would ask themselves upon hearing this, if that is true, what would I do in such circumstances? My life experiences have taught me that most people might cut a few corners, but would balk at doing someone else real or serious harm. A great many wouldn't even go that far, while there are some who would take whatever advantage they can, up to and including murder, if they calculated that they could gain from it, and would take the view that if their victims are too stupid or cowardly to apprehend and call them out, much less resist, that according to the law of the jungle, they, the victims, can cop whatever the perpetrators feel like dishing out. The victims are, after all, not even supporting their own natural rights or defending themselves and those they hold dear. So aren't they, in effect, surrendering those rights to any thug or criminal who feels like trampling them in the dirt? The question I ask is this: what is your answer to yourself when you consider that statement? What would you do if you knew you would never be found out and called to account for your actions? In short, are you to be trusted even to yourself? If there were no laws written down anywhere, would you still be an honest, decent person, even while others around you were perhaps descending into crime, corruption and turpitude? It's my experience that most people are basically decent and don't need to be policed or watched at every turn in order to behave morally. However, a major problem with society is that there is that small percentage, maybe somewhere around 5%, give or take, who have little or no compunction about taking whatever they can from others, especially if they can get away with it, as the saying goes. It's a harsh fact which too many people don't want to face, that there are those who are so evil that there are no lines they won't cross in the pursuit of their desires, be that for money, fame or power, especially power. And since there are more people now alive than there have ever been living at one time before, it follows as surely as night does day that there are more of those evil types now than there have ever been, does it not? Indeed, how could it be otherwise? And since the ultimate stimulant to the ego is the degree of power one can exercise over as many others as possible, there's never been any shortage of those who want to control everything and have power over everyone. Now, since no one has enough individual power to subdue everyone else, those who harbour such desires must necessarily seek assistance from others with similar goals. There's plenty of historical evidence of such combinations aligning themselves, usually in secret, to hatch plots to gain political power, seeking to manipulate events and opinions, so that by the time their plans become known, it's frequently too late for the masses to prevent themselves from becoming the victims, or we might say slaves, to these conspirators. I say that it is an amazingly naive, not to mention foolish individual who does not imagine that there are such plots and conspiracies going on all the time in our current world. And not just on the national scale, but in workplaces, clubs, even families. But our concern is with the wider general community in this context. The question this raises is, given these facts that there are power seekers and also pathologically inclined criminals who often are not only in league with each other, but are in many cases one and the same individuals, how wise is it to construct mechanisms for the purpose of exercising coercive, even violent control over others? Is it in fact possible to conceive and give support to a more destructive communal purpose than this? In common vernacular, can people be any more stupid than to give assent to any structure which has the power to strip them of every natural right, even the right to life itself. Why does any sane person even give the idea of an all-powerful government a moment's serious consideration? The only answer must be that we have been conditioned to accept such an idea. Magna Carta 1215 put in writing the natural laws which support our born rights, and even specifies the mechanism by which every individual may secure themselves against despotic abuse in Articles 39 and 40. Article 39 states that no person shall be harassed, distressed, detained, or have their property removed without their consent unless they be first tried by a jury of their peers or by the law of the land. Immediately this was issued, a group started to construct a legal system designed at undoing these safeguards. If one now goes into a so-called court and asserts one's right to a trial by jury, those presiding over these travesties of justice will seize upon the word "or" in that article and say that they are acting according to the law of the land. But that doesn't alter the fact that trial by jury is also the law of the land, in existence long before magistrates or judges' courts, and the word "or" gives the accused the choice. By what authority does the magistrate claim that their or their association's opinions have preference over any other single individual's? Is it just that they claim that because they belong to a larger group than the single accused, that the numbers give them the right to arbitrarily enforce their opinions on someone? Magna Carta certainly doesn't grant that right or authority to anyone, meaning that it is a wholly usurped power. Courts operating without lawful authority are treasonous and should be called out for it. Make them commit their sedition and treason in public before witnesses, that the day will come when these criminals, for that is what they are, will stand trial before juries for their iniquities. These principles are so obvious that one wonders why there isn't an incessant clamour for the reintroduction of trial by jury. Here are some of the reasons. 1. People have been conditioned to believe that they are not competent to correctly administer justice. 2. They resent the idea that for the system of juries to work properly, that they must devote a little time to grasping the basic principles, which doesn't take long at all, no more than a few hours, and be prepared to fulfil their share of the responsibility whereby they are unlikely to ever be called to jury service, certainly not more than once in their lifetime. 3, they are afraid of being seen to be challenging the status quo, and perhaps being mocked by others who also don't understand the concept. But I think that the main reason is that they simply don't trust their neighbours to be able to do the job, and want it left to experts. The flaw in that reasoning is that it's granting the principle that the administration of law is all about technicalities and esoteric knowledge. In fact, the administration of law is all about morality and conscience, and the average person's conscience is just as good as anyone else's, is it not? Especially as good as the conscience of one who administers justice for pay, surely. Is it not also more likely that in matters of conscience, the opinions of 12 diverse individuals are at least as likely to settle on the best outcome as that of one individual, especially one who is in the employ of one of the parties to the proceedings? How can such a one be unbiased? It's a fact that most of us judge other people by our own standards. Whatever level of moral rectitude one aspires to, tends to become the one we, if not expecting others to uphold, at least hope that they might attempt to emulate. So if this attitude of distrusting our fellow crown subjects is a major part of the problem, isn't it possible that this is because we don't properly trust ourselves? Yet where does this distrust come from? It gets back to that question at the start of this talk. What would we do if we knew we'd never have to account for ourselves? Most have been thinking in terms of committing positive wrongs, that is, crimes against others of some sort. But it's also just as deplorable to refuse to do something one ought to be doing, is it not? It's easy to think of examples such as leaving someone in a perilous situation to possibly perish when we might, at little risk to ourselves, rescue them. But what about not taking our share of the responsibility for upholding the law and the lawful administration of justice? If we decide to abdicate this responsibility because we convince ourselves that it's really someone else's job, is that not just as serious as committing one of the aforementioned positive wrongs? Are we just hoping that no one will discover that we didn't do our job, just as the criminal hopes that no one will discover their crimes? If we convince ourselves that because we've elected someone to administer the government, which includes appointing lawyers, magistrates and judges, then if they make a cock-up of it, it's not really our fault, is it? Who can blame us? We're only doing the same as everyone else, aren't we? Yeah, sure. Just like if there were no police and everyone resorted to crime, that wouldn't be our fault if we joined in then, would it? People, we need to stop lying to ourselves. There are sins of omission as well as sins of commission. As a society, we have collectively abandoned our consciences and left the reins of power, which don't morally belong in anyone's hands, in the hands of criminals and psychopaths, the very worst people possible. We might think that we can somehow evade reality by leaving it all up to others, but refusing to stand up for right and the truth will exact a terrible karmic debt upon us. There are people who fund every war that ever happens. They know that the horrors we have seen in war movies or imagined as we read books will absolutely, definitely happen to millions of people, yet they happily fund these atrocities purely for personal profit. It's not enough to tell ourselves that we're not as bad as them. These ghouls instruct those who people foolishly vote into power, our fake governments, how to carry out their horrifically evil plans. They have to be stopped. We can either perish in the attempt or perish by not attempting and heap up condemnation on ourselves. Or guess what? We might even succeed and leave a freer world for our offspring. There's only one non-violent method to control these pariahs, and that's to bring about the proper trial by jury system. For information and instruction on how to move towards this, see the links in the comments box and/or contact the email address on this video. Thank you for watching.